Hello and welcome. My name is Ted Zielinski. I'm a seminarian here at St. Charles Seminary in Philadelphia, and I have the honor today of interviewing Bishop Kulick. As way of introduction, Bishop Kulick is the 6th Bishop of the Diocese of Greensburg. He received a bachelor's degree from St. Vincent's College in Latrobe. Bishop Kulick attended St. Vincent's Seminary, where he received a master's in divinity and a master's degree in systematic theology. He also holds a licentiate in canon law. He was ordained a priest in 1992 in the Diocese of Greensburg, where he has served as an assistant priest, a pastor, and in numerous diocesan positions, including Director of Clergy Vocations, Episcopal Master of Ceremonies, Acting Chancellor, Vicar General, and Moderator of the Curia. Bishop Kulick was ordained to the episcopacy on February 11, 2021 at the Blessed Sacrament Cathedral. So Bishop, welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's a pleasure to be here at St. Charles. It's always an honor to come here. And it's a delight not only to meet with my seminarians who are studying here, but also to visit with people like yourself who are studying for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and many other of the dioceses here.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. It's one of the blessings of being in a bigger seminary. Just you kind of meet guys from all over the country and the state. You encounter, what it's like in different dioceses. So I think it's enriching for us too. So we appreciate it. So Bishop Kulick, I just want to start, I think this is really interesting, being the ordinary of the diocese, your home diocese. So, just kind of wondering with that, what has it been like being the bishop of the diocese you grew up in and you began as you spent your priesthood in? What are the positives and what might be some of the, not the negatives, but something that might be like a drawback in that?
Sure. Well, thanks for that question. It's a great question. And it's one that I get often. And I have to say, when the papal nuncio called me and said that the Holy Father had appointed me the Bishop of Greensburg, I was both stunned first for just being called to the episcopacy, but then to be named the Bishop of the diocese, which really was my home and the church in which I lived and ministered my entire life. But our Diocese of Greensburg is a rather small geographical diocese, only 4 civil counties. So having been born and raised and educated in the diocese, I knew not only my home area, but knew the diocese fairly well. And so my love for the diocese really in my discernment process for priesthood was always very much geared towards a diocesan priest. I felt a calling to that and certainly a calling to serve in the local church that was so familiar to me. And so that has been a blessing. I'll be ordained a priest, hard to believe, 32 years in May. Yeah, and so I had a lot of wonderful experiences in the diocese. Was able, as you mentioned in that curriculum vitae, to serve in a lot of parochial capacities, both as a parochial vicar and also as a pastor in some wonderful parishes, and really was given some great opportunities, especially early in my priestly life, to also be involved in diocesan ministries in a variety of capacities under a variety of different bishops. So not only did I have the great mentorship of my pastors that I was working with and the other priests of the presbyterate, but I really had a wonderful opportunity to interact with some of my predecessors. And each of them had their own style, each of them had their own personality. But what I found with all of them was a great love for that local church. And so when I was appointed by the Holy Father, I, as the Bishop of Greensburg, I felt a true blessing to be able to, what I saw as a continuum of service to my home region. I think probably one of the things that was beneficial for that, especially in the timing of it, Ted, is when I was named bishop and actually received the call in December of 2020. In our local church, we had just, of course, gone through the challenges of the whole grand jury and the whole clergy abuse scandal. And as Vicar General, was very familiar with a lot of the inner workings and a lot of the situations that involved. And so I found helping the church to come out of that and move on to the next stage, it was beneficial for me having that local history and knowing things like that, including many of the things, because I did serve as Vicar General under both Bishop Brandt and Bishop Malesic. So I had the opportunity of 2 of my predecessors. So some of the things that, everything from building and renovations to different policies, I was familiar with, as well as the clergy. That probably was the greatest blessing. Knew the clergy, they were my brothers in the priesthood, knew the permanent deacons and the religious. So I think it really enabled the diocese during that time. And then, of course, the other situation that we were all facing, COVID. So it was sort of a double hit. And so I felt really one of the benefits that I had being from the diocese was we were able to move forward sort of hitting the ground running. And that familiarity with not only the structures and the personnel of the diocese, but also looking at what some of my predecessors in long-term planning and having been a part of that understood, was able to really move forward without a lot of hesitation. You know, I often say when you're a new pastor or a new bishop, it takes you a year just to know where the light switches are. So I knew where the light switches were. Maybe not in every parish, but I knew the parishes, and I always smiled at being an MC too for the bishops. I knew I think the destination to every parish without GPS. So that's great. You know, a lot of times I can jump in the car and just go where I need to go, and I can again get working quickly and doing a lot of things. Probably one of the challenges as a bishop of your own diocese is what would be the counter of that. You have to, I think, constantly, and I try to the best of my ability to really listen and to take consultation, whether that's with clergy, religious, or the laity. We've done a lot of listening sessions during the synodal listening process, because what I want to be careful of is that I'm not approaching something with a preconceived idea because of my history. And sometimes things can change and situations change, and maybe from my history you remember a particular moment in time that is different now, or a situation that is much different. So I really try to do that. So I guess the challenge I have is not to be prejudiced by my history or my knowledge, but to try to make sure that I'm knowing what's happening now, and certainly looking at each situation fresh and giving, whether it's the personnel or the parish or the organization, a fresh new start and an opportunity.
Right. That's awesome. I really like that answer. And one thing you said that kind of struck me, I liked, was the kind of the continuation of your vocation. And you can, I'm sure you can really, looking back, you can really see God's guiding hand throughout your vocational journey, from college student, seminarian, deacon, priest, and then bishop. Now he's put people in your life and different things in the diocese that really he knew he was preparing you for today.
I look back more and more. Now, some of that, Ted, is I'm getting a little older. Maybe that's natural part of the aging process. But I do think it's also, trying to open yourself to God's grace and knowing that God does have a plan for each of us. We all know that in our vocation. You do in your vocational discernment. But yes, it's been wonderful to see. And some of the things that you experience, you say, oh, my goodness, that was maybe a difficulty or a cross of sorts when it was happening. But that experience has put you now in an in a position where you've learned from that, and you can take that with you into your ministry. I say this all the time. My great desire, I loved parish life, and I loved diocesan priesthood. And I guess if you were to say to myself, what would be my dream? My dream always was to one day be able to be a pastor. Right. I never could imagine being a bishop, but I've tried to take that, and I really have tried to bring that pastoring into my role as a bishop, because I really believe in my heart that's what we all are called to do as priests, and the bishop is maybe the chief shepherd, but more than ever he needs to be the pastor. So I've sort of conformed my will to God and said, well, Lord, if this is what you want me to be, it may be, I was thinking of a pastor of a parish, now you wanted to be a pastor of a diocese.
Well, praise God for that.
Yeah.
One thing you said actually leads me to the next question. You hinted to being the vicar general and being familiar with kind of the local, wounds and pains of the local church, and responding to that now as a bishop. So I'm just wondering, the church, like you said, we face many hardships and challenges from both inside the church and outside the church from the wider world, which can be discouraging. But in your experience as a bishop and as a priest of many years, do you see anything in the new generation today of priests and seminarians that can be encouraging, and also the younger, the laity, the people, that is encouraging for the future of the church?
I say it all the time, Ted. In our part of Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, we had a long history of a strong work ethic, an immigrant church, whether it was from Central Eastern Europe. But they came to work in the coal mines, the steel mills. They built our churches and worked very, very hard. There was a deep faith, an abiding faith that really changed into a beautiful Catholic culture of the region. But of course, as we know, as the successive generations from the immigrants go out, that Catholic culture can be so affected by the world around us. And the challenge we've had in our part of the diocese is dropping demographics, merging of parishes sometimes that were ethnic parishes and small faith communities, and really just the challenges of keeping the church vibrant. And when I say relevant, I don't mean relevant to the times in the sense of bending the church's tradition, but making the church still that strong voice in the greater community. The good thing that I see, and that I'm seeing both in our younger priests, and I've also been saying this, here in the diocese, we're having some young women responding to the vocation of religious life, which is wonderful. What I'm starting to see is, I really think that younger families, when I go out into parishes, I'm seeing younger families in the pews, I'm seeing children in the pews, and I think what's happening, my feeling, and in talking to people, I hear this, that our culture in many ways has bottomed out, and people are starting to realize that, to sort of use that term, intentional discipleship, people are starting to say, I have to be an intentional disciple of Christ. I have to make choices that put me in a position where my faith can grow, my relationship with Christ can grow, my love of the church and my belonging to the parish community has to grow. And I'm seeing it. And I think parents are starting to say we also have to be very astute about forming our children, because if not, the world will form them. Right. We don't have, like even in my time, the greater community, the parishes having the influence like we used to. So parents, I think, are really starting to say we have to make sure our children are in environments where they're learning the faith, they're seeing the faith, and they're looking and forming consciences and their lives in a manner where people of like-minded faith and morals gather together, and that their children are being formed in that way rather than incidentally or tacitly just by the world.
Right. Interesting. No, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Sure.
Another thing flowing from that, just from the young families and young people who are coming into their own faith. People my age, as we get older, we're really becoming rooted in our discipleship and in our relationship with the Lord. Do you have any advice for a young man or a young woman who might be seriously discerning a vocation, whether that be to the priesthood or to religious life, and how they might approach that in their life and in their prayer and in their own discipleship?
I would say you have to fall in love with God, and you have to fall in love with His church, because as a Catholic, I don't believe you can fall in love with God and not be in love with His church. And I think that to do that, I say so often, prayer is at the center of that relationship. And I think today, specifically with, again, a lot of and not to beat our culture, but there are cultural challenges in every generation, every time. But technology has so many wonderful, just what we're doing here today, wonderful ends and means of reaching people. But also elements of that technology can also take away our attention and can cause us to be distracted, I think, in many ways. And so prayer is so important, to center ourselves on that prayer, to develop that personal relationship with Christ. And from there, that love of Christ, I think, grows, that allows us to then have a deeper and deeper desire to know more, to learn more, to almost digest more. I find that with young people and people going through the order of Christian initiation of adults. Once you whet that appetite, it's so important. But that personal relationship has to be there first. And I think pedagogically, that's one of the things we're looking back historically and saying, we did a great job of educating with our institutions, with our religious education programs, with our Catholic schools. But somehow maybe we failed to first foster a relationship with Christ and then feed the intellect. And I think that's why today we see a lot of people say, I went to Catholic school, I don't go to church, or I'm practicing their faith. They know the tenets of the faith. They were given wonderful education, but if there isn't first that relationship. So I would say that's first, to fall in love with Christ, to keep that relationship going with prayer. Because I'll also tell you, Ted, anytime I have not just a priest coming in who's having difficulties or might be discerning leaving the priesthood, but when I deal with marriage couples or just difficulties, I will say sometimes to the priest or the religious, when did you stop praying? And you can almost start to see that time that they can identify their prayer life breaking down of when they began to falter in their ministry. And in married life, when communication began to break down. And that's our communication with God.
Right.
So I think that. The other thing is, I say to young people, don't be afraid to witness your faith. I think our world today so many times wants to, tamp down people who live their faith. And I think more than anything, the best means of evangelization is an authentic living of our faith with integrity and with mercy and sincerity. And really, as the Holy Father would say, accompanying people. I think that's what that's all about, walking with them, but modeling that faith through a real life of integrity.
Interesting. No, that's really good. One thing that I kind of hear in that too, what we learn in our classes, like in theologies and different things, the church is always both and in respect to our interaction with the church, it is there is infrastructure and education that's important, but it's also personal. It's the intellect and the heart, and it's finding the medium, and that's very crucial. It sounds like in your own.
Absolutely. I think more than ever, what I find with a hunger, and this isn't just young people. This is across the board anymore. Older people, middle-aged, they're starving for relationality. Part of that may be too the virtual elements of life that have taken out some of our human connectivity, but people are dying for relationality. And I find it, for me, one of the most important roles I believe I have as a bishop is to be out there and be present, talking with people, not to people, working with people, not telling them what to do. Learning with them, not just preaching to them. And so I find that really that will draw people from an evangelization point of view closer to church and closer to God, first by just having a human relationship in which they can relate to someone. And I think people are starving now more than ever for some of those good, healthy human relationships. I think it's just imperative for us.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, it really reminds me of the image of the Good Shepherd.
Exactly.
That's like one of the crucial roles of the priest. As you know very well, having been being a priest, is the priest brings Jesus to people. Just brings them into communion with God, and that kind of leads me on to my final question. Having been a priest, for almost, you said 32 years.
Be 32 in May, yeah.
Do you have any stories or experiences from your priesthood of really the Lord in a powerful way working through you or through another priest and really seeing, the love of God through his priesthood, like St. John Vianney said?
Yeah. Almost every day. Again, going back to that understanding of relationality. But I'll tell a story because we're coming up on the feast of St. Joseph. And I say this sometimes in vocation talks. I have to say my discernment in vocation is I was raised in a traditional Catholic family, ethnic parish. We sort of were dripping in Catholicism. The town, I was just doing a little article as we're coming up on Holy Week, and I was raised in a Slovak parish, and I would say we would have Holy Thursday pilgrimages on Holy Thursday night to the different churches. And I used to joke that for us, ecumenism was making a once-a-year pilgrimage on Holy Thursday to the Italian church, then to the Hungarian parish, then to the Irish. That was ecumenism. But that being said, the point is, I think I was, as St. Joseph's feast day is coming up, I say in that vocation talk so many times, I can't say that I had this moment like St. Paul with a conversion, where all of a sudden I was knocked off a horse and you're going to be a priest, I'm calling you a priest. It was more of a slow, constant, gradual procession through life and trying to hear and God's call and trying to respond to it. And I said there's probably only one or two times in my life where I have had that experience of actually hearing, not just in my heart, but physically, what I believe was God talking to me. And in answering your question, one of those was when I was the pastor of St. Joseph Parish. And this parish had produced a lot of vocations, one of the largest number of vocations in our diocese historically. Large territorial parish, which was in one of our larger industrial cities. And just a lot of challenges. it was my second pastorate, but it was a huge parish. It was a jump in the size of the parish I had come from as my first pastorate. And just a lot of difficult decisions. And I remember the story that Father Herzog, who was the pastor for 48 and a half years at this parish, used to pray every day at the altar of St. Joseph, the side altar. And one of these days, it was a hot day. We didn't have air conditioning in the church. It had to be almost 100 degrees. And I'm hot. There's so many things going on. Everyone wants this, wants that. And I just was physically, spiritually, and I felt mentally exhausted. And I said to myself, I remember that story of Father Herzog. So I went over to the side altar, and I knelt down. And I'm looking up at the statue of St. Joseph. And that was the only statue in the church that was brought from the old 1891 church to the 1925 church. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm looking, and I vividly remember in my mind, my prayer was as I looked at St. Joseph, I said, dear Lord, this is your church. St. Joseph, I need your intercession. What am I to do? And I remember hearing as if someone was standing behind me in my ear saying, are you going to swim or are you going to tread water? So much so that I actually turned around. I swore someone was behind me. There was no one. And I'll tell you, that really moved me because it was a rare, true, I believe, religious experience. But it was a guiding experience. It was in my mind, God giving me his wisdom. Wow. But ultimately, I also had to make my free will choice as a pastor. What was I going to do? And so because of the complexity, I knew what that meant, what I had to do. And I did it. And I saw a tremendous change and reversal in almost every element of the parish's life and ministry. And I look back at that and I say, when you talk about as a priest, it's sometimes like St. Therese would say, it's the little way, it's the little things. But sometimes as a pastor too, it's some of the big decisions you make reach the entire community. So I would say that really, from that day on, I even think about that and hear those words, never in that same way, but in my mind, when I'm praying for things, even now as a bishop, I'll sometimes, if a difficult, are you going to swim or are you going to tread water? And I think, that would be sort of St. Joseph, practical, So that's an experience where I think, that. And I would also have to say, too, dealing so much with the infirmed and the dying, the hospitalized and the sick. Tremendous, powerful moments when you see God's grace and are privileged to be a part of people's lives.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
Thank you again for just joining us today.
Oh, glad to.
It's really an honor and a pleasure. We appreciate your witness and your leadership in the Diocese of Greensburg, also in our seminary community, visiting us, so someone to look up to. So we appreciate it, and thank you again. Well, thank you, and it's always a pleasure again to be here. And I just want to assure you, Ted, and all the seminarians, and certainly all of those who are discerning a call to priesthood, diaconate, religious life, my prayers. Thank you. I pray every day for an increase of vocations. And, God's answering our calls. We see it. Mm-hmm. And again, say it so often, God is gifting us with some wonderful, holy, and truly gifted men and women for the church. And I have great hope for the Church of the Future. I'm excited about it. I see it alive and well. Awesome. Well, praise God. Well, thank you. Thank you.